Tonight's the second evening in our series. We're doing a series on what are called the Brahma Vihāras, which I'll say a little bit about later. Those of you who were here last week who have heard Amritchandra say a little bit about what those are. And last week I was trying to come up with a title for this evening without having given that much thought to what I was going to say. And I came up with the title, The Hidden Realms of the Heart. And I've somewhat deviated from what I had in mind when I came up with that title, but it will still fit in. So yeah, Hidden Realms of the Heart. But basically this evening, as I said in the foyer, is about positive emotion, which is very much sort of a context and an important the way of looking at what we're exploring in this whole series. And our teacher said that positive emotion is absolutely vital. So you can't really have a spiritual life without strong positive emotion. Though I think it's really important when we start to explore what this means, that it doesn't necessarily mean strong feeling. Not everyone's like that. And don't worry if you're not. That's not exactly what's being got at. So what I want to do this evening is really explore, well, what is positive emotion? We can sort of toss that term off and think we know what it means. And I'd like to try and get sort of behind or beyond all our standard answers. So let's have some of those and some related terms. So we often equate positive emotion with skillful states of mind or emotion. I'm not going to go into that, but that's another term you may have heard. We equate it with states of mind that are creative. Something else I'm not really going to explain, but it may come out later. So those are closely related words, skillful, creative. And often we'll define positive emotion as states of mind that are characterized by kindness or love, by generousness, and by awareness, or you might say wisdom. And negative emotion, so to speak, as characterized by the opposites. So by craving, aversion, and delusion, and just disinterest, or lack of awareness, you could say. Almost a willful lack of awareness. And that's quite a good working way of talking for getting a sense of what this distinction is between positive and negative emotion. But I want to try and go a bit deeper into what the nature of positive emotion is. So let's start with some language. So I've already used the word sort of state of mind or mental state. Actually, it occurred to me the other day in preparing for this, that's actually a really non-Buddhistic term, a state of mind, because a state implies something that's sort of fixed, stasis. It's sort of, it implies a thing that's fixed. And of course, for anyone who knows better the Buddha's teaching, nothing is fixed. States of mind are not fixed. And it's their very idea that they are that causes so much of our difficulty, so much of our suffering. So I might use that word state, but it's not something fixed. Actually, so in this respect, the word emotion is actually really appropriate. Emotion. And if you look at the origin of the word, it comes from a Latin meaning to move. So positive emotion is energy that's sort of moving, isn't it, in a particular way, in a particular sort of direction. And that's getting more to what the nature of this is. And in fact, the Pali word, the ancient Indian word that in this case we're translating as emotion, is probably samkalpa. I'm not used to it, so I'm not finding it easy to say, which translates something like sort of purpose or intention. And this is getting more to it. So when we're talking about positive emotion, yes, there can be feelings involved in the way that we normally understand that. But what we're primarily getting at is the quality of sort of intentionality. I think last week the word volition came up. So it's about a sort of the mind, as it were, consciousness, as it were, maybe it's best to say the mind, moving with energy in a particular direction. Wanting has that quality, doesn't it? Moving towards something, not wanting. Well, that's trying to push something away. It's also a movement of energy. Ignoring is also a kind of a movement of energy. Not necessarily fully conscious. Volition can be something that we don't actually notice we're doing. I was talking to a friend here earlier about a particular habit of mind I have, which got a particular idea of who I am, which is old hat. I'm not going to go into it, I haven't got the time, but it's a really old view of who I am. And just noticing myself just doing that. Oh yeah, that's me. And I don't even notice most of the time when that happens. It's just a very subtle thing, but there's energy in it, there's intentionality in it, and it's actually limiting. So that's the word, yeah, intention, volition. This is what's meant here primarily. This is the main quality that we're interested in when we're talking about emotion. And then there's this word positive. So that's maybe we have more of an instinctive sense of what that means, positive emotion. But it could easily be confused with what's pleasant or what sort of feels good. And that's not what we're getting at. In a way, I think positive emotion is pleasant, but not necessarily in an obvious way. So a classic example of this is remorse. Like you've done something or you said something to somebody, and then you notice, oh goodness, I've really hurt that person. And that feels in a way painful, but that's positive emotion. And we're going more into it, you'll see that it does have a quality of, it's not entirely painful. Similarly, a state of intoxication might be pleasant on the surface, but would not be positive. Okay, so I said a few things about positive emotion there. Maybe I can come back to that thing of states of mind based in kindness, generousness, we could also say contentment, and awareness or understanding. What I'd like to do now is get you to connect with something in your own experience, and a bit of a space where some of us can share what we've noticed. So we're going to do maybe a few minutes. I wouldn't bother getting into meditation posture unless you particularly want to. I'm just going to lead us in a short sort of reflection. And yeah, let's just do it. So just relaxing, turning your mind sort of inwards. Letting the mind rest a moment. And I want you to recollect or imagine a state of mind that you've experienced or that you can imagine, which is positive. So it might be a state of kindness, generousness, contentment, gratitude, other possibilities. Just imagining feeling into a positive state of mind. And just taking an interest in what it feels like. What does a state of mind feel like? What are the kind of qualities of this state of mind? Not the situation or the story, but the actual state of mind. The emotion, if you like. What is the mind like in this state? Just feeling into, imagining, recollecting that. And now, if you've connected with something, imagine that same state of mind stronger, more developed, magnified. What would it be like to feel that 10 times more strongly? Let go if that's a bit much. Just noticing how that feels. Okay, and then relaxing, bringing that little exercise to an end. So what I'd like to ask now is, there won't be time for everybody to say something, and you may not want to, which is fine. I'd like to invite you to share some of the qualities of that state of mind. So I'm not so much looking for examples of positive emotion here, like the ones I've already named, gratitude and remorse and so on. I'm looking more like, what are the qualities of a positive state of mind or positive emotion? What's it like to be in such a state? And if you're online, you can write something in the chat. It'd be great to have a few responses from those of you who are online as well. So any offers, what's it like to be in a positive state of mind, to experience positive emotion?
Well, I noticed there was physical relaxation.
Anywhere in particular?
I guess I was feeling more in the upper body.
Yes, there was an experience at a bodily level that was pleasant time, I guess. Yeah. Thank you, Yoshitaka. Anyone else, Jess?
I think I feel, or felt in my example, at ease, sort of sense of being at ease. Can manifest in a physical way, very, very, very subtly. A sense of kind of, my conscience is clear, I'm at ease with myself.
Oh, right, at ease with yourself. Yeah, right. So kind of a, I've got a list of things I've written down, which I want to kind of draw in, sort of like a wholesome sort of quality, a sort of wholeness, as it were. You're not sort of at war with yourself. Not sort of, maybe I'll just let you throw in your own words and I can fill it out later. Yeah, at ease with yourself. Adele, yes, what have you?
Online, Peter said he's connected with another.
Connected with another, yeah. Let me stay with that for a moment. Unless anyone else has written the same sort of thing.
No, there's different ones.
Great. Yeah, that's a very significant one, isn't it? It's been so in a state of so I was recollecting an experience of sort of being with someone else who was describing a very painful experience, and definitely a strong sense of connection. Not separating out from them, feeling connected with them. Yeah, what else is online, Adele?
So Jeanette has said my mind was quite an outward focus.
Quiet, yes, a certain sort of calmness, and at the same time, I guess it's not necessarily outward focus, that depends upon the positive state, but yeah, again, like that, connecting with someone else. We're not sort of turned in a sort of a narrow type sort of way. What else, anybody? Sorry, is something else online, Adele?
Yeah, there's two more.
on.
So Sadraja says it feels expansive and satisfying.
Well, very good. Yeah, expansive. So consciousness is kind of bigger in some sense. It's taking it. That's the case just with connecting with one person, isn't it? A kind of sense of what we're aware of is kind of broadened out to include someone else, and it could be many other people. And satisfying. Maybe I'll come back to that. Anyone else in here? Yeah.
It might be because you already planted that seed, that kind of flowing rather than being stuck, so very flowing and natural.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about flowing? I'm interested in that. I think I've got a sense of what you mean, but
It's hard to say more. I just kind of have a sense of like this sort of river. There's just a very peaceful. I suppose it's not being stuck on any one thought, or it's just sort of.
yeah, not being stuck on any one thought, like a flowing river. Yeah, it's sort of a negative state of mind is quite sort of trapped and sort of rigid and tight, isn't it? Whereas if you're in a positive state, I would say, yeah, there is a quality of yeah, something natural, and I know what you mean, even though I find it very difficult to put it in more precise language.
Clean, like very clean
Yeah,
flow.
yeah. I'm reminded of I don't know if you all know the story of the Buddha before his enlightenment, the Buddha to be, recollecting himself sitting under what's called the rose apple tree, recollected himself as a child, watching apparently his father ploughing a field, probably a ceremonial ploughing, and just experiencing a very natural relaxation at ease, a very natural sort of quality of, yeah, just being at ease, a pleasure. He talks about a pleasure that's not to do with the physical senses. It's something of a different nature. And feeling that was, yeah, natural, the way to enlightenment, indeed, he says. Yeah, so that's a good quality.
Like a kind of duality, so like a kind of spongy feeling, taking in information, situation, but at the same time, like a pulsing kind of outwardness.
Okay, so the spongy feeling is like a receptivity.
Yeah, like you know when you see a film and it kind of slows down, you can just look around a bit more and go, oh, and then kind of with that sort of like a something that kind of goes out a little bit more in terms of like an energy.
Yeah, yeah.
Felt sense.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Julia. I think that's very much very much what metta is about, isn't it? There's a kind of an openness to what we're feeling and other people, another person, and then there's a responsiveness. There's a energy moving out. Okay, well, maybe let's wind that up there. I'm sure we could draw out more. I might have a few more, unless anyone's got anything burning to throw in. I don't want to cut anyone off who really wants to share something.
Well, I felt really powerful actually.
Powerful,
Yeah, but not in a like an egotistical, destructive way, but a very like a clean burn sort of.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like not like a flamethrower, but also not like, not like a candle, but you know, in chemistry, when you put the Bunsen burner on like the blue flame, it's very hot, but it's also very contained and helpful.
Yeah, so
It's like a clean-
contained,
Yeah,
clean,
yeah.
Powerful sort of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? There's a power and a strength to positive emotion. Probably got a few more things to add which we haven't covered. No, thank you. I mean, that's a great. We've already evoked a lot there between us. That's really great. Yeah, there is this quality of I think comes out with a naturalness and ease, sort of a wholesomeness and feeling sort of whole. So there's something about, gosh. So when we're in a positive state of mind, where we're coming from, I would say, is you could say our values but in a higher sense, a deeper or higher sense, we're being true to what we feel to be most deeply important.
Like a sense of alignment.
Sorry?
Like a sense of alignment.
Alignment. Yeah. So I think we have a natural sense of the importance of kindness, for example, of truth, these sorts of qualities. And when we have a natural ethical sense, and when we act in accordance with that, there's a kind of a sense of wholeness, because we are not in conflict with something deep within ourselves, as it were, like the clear conscience. And that feeling of remorse I mentioned earlier is when we have acted in a way that's not in accord with that, and we're feeling the painfulness of it. But actually there's a satisfying, Satyraja mentioned satisfying, there's a satisfying quality to being aware of that and being with it. I think it's interesting that even when we're with something that's actually painful, like being with somebody else's pain, there's a satisfying quality to being with it. Maybe we feel that particularly now if we're with our own pain. Rather than trying to push it away, there's something that feels wholesome about actually being with it, being present, not being in conflict with what we're experiencing. Yes, there's meaningfulness. That's a very important quality in positive emotion. It feels, what we're doing feels in some sense meaningful, I would say. Not necessarily at a rational level, that might come later, but it feels like this is a worthwhile experience, as it were. We could put it that way. And connected to what you were saying about sort of powerful, sort of, I'll say empowering, sort of a positive mental state is very alive. Whereas, a state of mind that's negative, it can have a lot of energy, but it's kind of tied up in a knot in some way or other. Could add more. Beauty, could say. Dark was talking last week in leading meditation, was talking about looking for the beauty in metta, in loving kindness. And I would say there's an aesthetic quality, a quality of, excuse me, that's not a beautiful experience. There's a quality of beauty in a positive state of mind. Again, sort of a wholesomeness, natural kind of quality. Yeah, okay. And cannot not really also say there's something liberating about it. There's something sort of, energy is moving in a way that feels, well, we had expansive, didn't we? Empowering, alive, freeing up the knots and the blockages that we get into, the inner conflicts. That sort of being, even just a little bit, we're not necessarily talking about strong experiences here. That's being just a little bit freed up. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of it's quite a lot there, isn't there? A lot of rich language, and I think it's worth again coming back to how we're not necessarily talking about strong feelings. So my favourite sort of examples here are things like, well, say you're walking down a corridor. There's a door which is shut. There's someone coming the other way carrying some boxes. Without even thinking about it, you just open the door for them. There might be a complete stranger, but that's probably the best type of example. If you're not interested in whether they like you particularly, it simply is a natural response of connecting with another person's needs and acting in a way which feels wholesome and satisfying. Though that isn't the reason we're doing it, but nevertheless, that's how it feels. So you wouldn't experience that, call that a strong emotion, would you? Probably. It's just, you probably wouldn't even notice what you're feeling. It's just, oh yeah. But nevertheless, some of those qualities, probably if you really looked deeply into it, probably most or all of those qualities would be in that type of experience, I think. Okay. So there's a bit of a picture painted of many of the qualities of positive emotion, a positive mental state. So it's very clear, I think, from that, we're not talking about a state. It's something that's moving, that's flowing. Maybe I'll just mention contentment. I did mention that before. Because contentment at first glance might look like it's not really moving. So nothing's really happening. It's the absence of wanting something. But actually, contentment's a lot more than an absence. I was reading something by one of our more senior order members called Subhuti on this. He's describing contentment as augmentative. That's another word you could apply to these states generally. It has a quality in it that naturally leads deeper. If it doesn't lead deeper, it's because something else, as it were, comes come in and distracted us. So even in contentment, there's a movement of energy, very subtly, that's taking us sort of further in. Okay, so we're talking about the Brahma Vihāras in this series. So that'll be a word that some of you are not familiar with, or you've heard it described last week, but still not that familiar with. So the Brahma Vihāras are a list of 4 qualities. Let me just run through the list very briefly. 4 qualities which the Buddha encouraged us to develop, and indeed particularly in meditation. So the first one is metta, loving kindness, as we often translate it. Then karuna, compassion, which is when our metta meets somebody else's pain, our kindness meets somebody else's pain. Mudita, we often translate as sympathetic joy, when our metta meets somebody else's good qualities, or good or well-being, you could say. Good qualities or well-being, rejoicing in that in somebody else. And upekkha, which is equanimity, which, gosh, I won't try and define exactly what was meant by that. That takes quite a bit of unpacking, and I don't think I fully understand it, or perhaps any of them. These are deep qualities. They all come from metta. They all come from loving kindness as their sort of root. But the term, the Brahma Vihāras, is jolly interesting. So Brahma here is, actually in Buddhism we speak not just Brahma, but Brahmas. So Brahma is, if you like, a higher being, an angel of the highest order, you could say, a deva, a god in a sense. There are gods in Buddhism. They're not worshipped in the sense of they are in Christianity, and they do not live forever. All beings are mortal. We won't go into what about Buddhas. That's a very complicated question, but a god is in Buddhism is simply a being that's been reborn in a higher realm for the time being, and is not omnipotent and not immortal. And Brahma is such a being, or there are Brahmas in Buddhist cosmology. This is a bit of a footnote in terms of Buddhism. It's not something that's important. These different classes of devas. So there's a whole subject there. But yeah, Brahma Vihāra. Vihāra is a place you live. So the term Brahma Vihāras means living like or with Brahma, or the Brahmas. So these qualities, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, the Buddha is saying is like living with or living as Brahma, in the highest forms of many classes of Buddhist sort of angels, if you like, devas, we say. So that's quite something, isn't it? To really experience these qualities, let's just stick with metta. To really experience metta, loving kindness in its fullness, is like living with these realm of the highest gods, as it were. And the other terms that use to translate Brahma Vihāras more poetically are the sublime abodes. That's sublime, that's a strong word, isn't it? Something very beautiful being suggested there. The sublime abodes, very elevated, very beautiful. The immeasurables, that's another term that's used, something that is boundless, expansive, we had earlier. So there's no limit to how broad, how far metta, compassion, and so on can go. The Buddha used this kind of method of this kind of language quite a lot in his teaching. So he would take a term or an idea in the culture of the place and the day where he lived, and he would give it his own sort of twist, if you like. Gosh, I did have another example of this in mind, and it's gone. Anyone think of a good example of that? Where the Buddha's taken a particular term and used it in his own way? Brahmin, yes, thank you, Siddhi. Yeah, so Brahmin in Hinduism, or in the version of what became Hinduism that was at the time, a Brahmin, member of the highest castes, the ones who performed the ritual, who led ceremonies and so on. And the Buddha says, no, a Brahmin is basically one who really lives a spiritual life. It doesn't matter what caste you're from. The Buddha's not believing caste, rejected it, trying to work against it. So saying, no, actually, in effect, anyone can be a Brahmin if they really practice the spiritual life. So yeah, taking this teaching that's already there, saying, no, that doesn't mean that, it means this. Well, maybe that's what he's doing here. Rather than trying to be literally reborn with or as Brahma, he's saying, well, actually, no, if you want to do that, you practice these practices, and that might actually also happen as a result. But in the meantime, just, practice the metta bhavana. That will lead to this kind of state. Okay, so let me say a little bit about what we can actually do. Having evoked what's possible here with positive emotion, what can we actually do? And there's probably an awful lot we could say about this. So I think one thing is to trust. To actually trust that this is something that we're all capable of and we all experience. The ways in which we experience it will be somewhat different. Some of us will have very strong feelings. We may do the metta bhavana and have strong feelings of warmth and well-wishing, and some of us won't. We'll do the metta bhavana. Maybe we're just getting just a little bit more interested in somebody else for their sake. That's a much less strong experience. Just call it this intentionality, a kind of wanting to open the door for somebody. So not necessarily strongly felt, but this is something we can all experience, and we do all experience. It's something we can all develop. So I think that's something really important. I noticed a few of us were on the summer retreat we had, 5-day retreat back in July, and Art City here was leading afternoon meditation and really inviting us to look at what was going on that was getting in the way in our meditation. And I noticed doubt in myself, and it was a kind of an assumption that what I was going to experience in the meditation was the same old thing that I always experience in that meditation, metta bhavana, probably. It was just an assumption. And can you see how limiting that kind of assumption is? And so we're going to do that, but it's really good to notice it and trying to remind ourselves that every meditation is different and we don't know what's going to happen and we're capable of a lot more than we think we are. They're trusting that we're capable of more than we think we are. There's exploring and opening up to what's actually there. A little example. I was walking through Jesus Green the other day. I've probably been reflecting on this talk, and I saw a woman coming the other direction pushing a pram with a young child, and her face looked quite sort of, or the word that came to my mind was haunted. And part of my mind said, oh, I should, bring loving kindness to her, sort of let's cultivate some metta here. And now, hang on a minute, there was already a response of care and concern. And that idea, I should do such and such, was afterwards. So there was already a kind of a connecting, momentary and not very strong, but a connecting with her and caring about what her experience was, which I didn't really notice until I took stock of, oh golly, yeah, that already happened, as it were. So we can not notice what was already going on. So there's also developing a sensitivity to those germs of positive emotion, threads of positive emotion already there, that are already emerging for us, because that's what we need to pay attention to, as well as encouraging ourselves. Well, there's spending time in conditions that help stimulate positive emotion, and hopefully this Buddhist center is such a place, at least most of the time. So you're going to places and being with people and doing activities that help us spark off positive emotion for us. There's acting on it. So notice a generous impulse, act. I mean, that's not a rule that one should follow in all circumstances, but it's a good principle, actually. If we notice a generous impulse, unless something in us says, no, hold on a minute, this isn't a good idea right now, just act on it. Okay. But to finish off this discussion, this exploration, it's also important to say that positive emotion, whilst it's really important, it's really very key to the spiritual life, it's not enough. That we also need to have wisdom. I mean, there's a lot more we said, but different dimensions of spiritual life. But metta in itself is not enough. What's needed also is to then notice the nature of our experience based upon doing that kind of practice. Now, this one could spend a lot of time on. I notice my mind being pulled in different directions here, and things I'd like to say that don't have time for. Perhaps it's enough just to invite you to encourage is a better word, to encourage you to notice when there's positive emotion, when there's a positive state of mind, what's that like and what effect does it have upon you? When you're in a negative state of mind, when you spend time in a negative state of mind, notice what that's like and what effect that has upon you. And obviously, we're doing this all the time. Experiencing negative and positive emotion, it's happening all the time. But yeah, try and make a bit of a habit of noticing what it's like. And then if you reflect on that, well, that will really have an effect, won't it? This is the law of karma I'm talking about, really noticing the law of karma, that there's more to the law of karma than this, but this is a large part of the law of karma. That the states of mind, the emotions that we express, that we even just do mentally, they have an effect. What is that effect? So perhaps that's enough. So we've been exploring, what is positive emotion? And I've suggested it can be helpful to go beyond just the list of how we usually describe it, and just really look at the qualities. And we've had a lot of very interesting qualities drawn out there. Connectedness, expansiveness, flow, feeling at ease, powerful, satisfying, lots of very interesting qualities, beauty.